A while ago, I made a video explaining the historical origins of the concept of a paladin, since it's something that's well known in medieval fantasy media, but far fewer people know the historical origins of it. That video did quite well, and I've been playing lots of Baldur's Gate lately, so I figured it might be fun to make another video going over the historical origins of a D&D class. And since my Dante videos are taking quite a while to make, I figured I might as well make a sort of shorter, unscripted, laid-back video like the last one. And I figured I might as well choose something that's closely connected to topics that I've studied extensively during my graduate studies. So, without further ado, let's answer the question: what is a sorcerer? In order to understand the origins of the sorcerer, we need to understand the root of the term, the Latin sors, or sortes in nominative plural, and we more often see the term in the plural. And this is a term which is often translated into English as lot or lots. And it has similar connotations to the term lot in English, and it can be used in similar ways. A sors can be an allotment. It could be one's lot in life. It often has to do with chance, or probably more accurately for the ancient Greek and Roman concept would be fate. One's lot in life, one's fate. It was used often in reference to the casting of lots, things like drawing straws or anything like that, which gives it a connection to division. And so the term sortes can mean divisions, things divided up. It comes to mean inheritance. And this is actually where the English word to sort, the verb to sort, comes from, and sort as in like a sort of thing. But sortes were often closely tied to divination, that is, consulting the divine, the gods, or other divine entities for advice, for approval, to ensure that the gods approved of what you were doing, they were happy with you, they weren't mad at you, and if they are mad at you, figuring out what to do to change that. Divination was something that was very, very important throughout the classical worlds, amongst the Greeks, the Romans, and others. But the term sortes is most often connected to types of divination which have to do with chance, with the gods interacting. Hang on, there's a lot of wind and leaves blowing. With the gods interacting and making their will known through interfering with something which might otherwise seem random. Lot casting. Typically, we're talking about picking things at random, like drawing straws, but more often we have things like rolling dice or knuckle bones or picking stones or potsherds out of a bag or something, and using that to determine either directly what the gods are trying to say or something on a list of responses. You have divinatory books which have various responses, and you roll the dice to determine which response to apply to your own life. Sort of like a fortune cookie, though sometimes you could ask specific questions, though other times you would apply it broadly to your life. There was also another type that was quite popular, which would be opening a book to a random page. And typically this is books that were very popular, books of poetry, especially poetry which was thought to be divinely inspired. The most prominent ones that we know of are the sortes Virgilianae for the works of Virgil, and the sortes Homericae for the works of Homer. And we have lot casting attested as a practice both in a temple context where it's a little bit more official. You have a priesthood maybe who are in charge of it, or people would come to this temple and perform it there specifically to get the response from the god, whose temple it is. This is attested by Cicero, Pausanias, and we have archaeological evidence for it also through inscriptions. But it seems also to have been especially popular with itinerant diviners, people who were more travelers, who this was their job. They would travel around and get clients who would consult them for, telling their fortune. Actually, the closest equivalent in the modern day would be something like a fortune teller. Now, so far I've been talking about pre-Christian Roman religion and Greek religion, but Christians were no stranger to these practices either. So they didn't disappear upon the Christianization of the Roman Empire. The Bible has a couple of instances of lot casting, specifically in the book of Jonah, when Jonah and some others are on the boat and it's really stormy. The sailors draw lots to determine who God is angry with and therefore who to throw off the boat, which winds up being Jonah, and he gets eaten by a big fish. Then the other instance is in the Acts of the Apostles, where after Judas is dead, the now 11 apostles are trying to figure out who is going to be the new 12th apostle. And so they consult God through lot casting to help determine to help God decide who amongst their candidates should be the new 12th apostle. And I think it's Matthias, if I'm not mistaken. And, Christians in their own lives were practicing oftentimes Christianized versions of these ancient sortes. You have the sortes biblicae, which is consulting the Bible, turning to a random page, consulting the first verse that catches your eye and applying that somehow to your life. St. Augustine famously did this, and it was an important part in his conversion to Christianity. And then you also have things like the sortes Sanctorum, which historically for a long time have been assumed to be the same thing as the sortes biblicae, but more recently, William Klingshirn, I think, has done a good job in arguing otherwise. And now we know that it refers to lists of responses where, again, you would roll dice or knuckle bones or whatever, and it would direct you to choose a certain one of these responses to apply to your own life. Nonetheless, pagan religious practice in the Christian era was often recategorized as magic, regardless of whether it was deemed legitimate by the Roman authorities or not. And so, magic was an inherently negative category. They reframed pagan practice as magic because in the Christian view, the pagan gods were equated to demons. And these practices of consulting these gods and getting power from them was actually getting power from demons who did this sort of thing in order to convince people to worship them and therefore to be damned. So officially, oftentimes, sortes were considered magic and therefore evil. Not to say that this meant Christians stopped practicing it, and those who continued to practice it justified their use in many ways. Either they just didn't know that it was considered evil, or they said, yeah, but this isn't demonic, this is God, I'm asking God to interfere, not demons, or there are other magical practices where they say, well, yeah, it is demons, but I'm sort of controlling them, so it's okay. So, but still, sortes sanctorum and other types of lot casting are repeatedly condemned by church councils. Bede, the Northumbrian monk, and St. Jerome, both in their commentaries on the Bible, Bede commenting on the Acts of the Apostles, Jerome on the book of Jonah, talk about how lot casting is that these passages should not justify the casting of lots because elsewhere in the Bible it condemns magicians. And again, sortes are recategorized as magic, so it is the work of magicians. So it's a complicated thing, especially with the sortes biblicae. You know, as I said, Augustine used it, but even he was careful in a letter to Januarius later on. He says that, you know, it's better than pagan divination, but one needs to be careful how one uses it. One should only apply oracles from the Bible in cases related to the next life. You're basically cheapening it if you're trying to apply it to your own, this worldly affairs. You shouldn't be consulting the Bible to determine if you should invest in crypto or whatever. Although, not to say that, people did do that. Well, not crypto, but for worldly affairs, probably most people who were consulting the sortes biblicae were concerned with this worldly affairs, but still, that one's a much more controversial instance. So, how do we get from sortes to sorcerer? Well, there were a variety of terms used to refer to peoples who practiced, who used sortes. One early one is sortilegus, used by Isidore of Seville in his book on etymologies. And sortilegus literally means lot reader. You could call the practice of lot reading, you could call it sortilegum. Another term that's attested as early as the 9th century by Hincmar of Reims is sortiarius, with arius being a suffix in Latin for like an occupation. So sortiarius could be literally translated as a lotter, someone whose job involves lots. And sortiarius becomes a fairly generic term later in the Middle Ages to refer to a magic user more broadly, more generically, not necessarily tied to lot casting, but to sort of any type of magic. Kind of like maleficus, although maleficus is more tied to like magic that directly harms people. Though it becomes more generic in time too, to be like the standard word that we would translate into English as witch. Sortiarius becomes like a wizard or a sorcerer, if you will. A variation of this, hang on, I'm going to get this right. Sorcerus comes into French and ultimately becomes the word sorcier, sorcière in the feminine, sorcier in the masculine. And through French, this comes into English ultimately as sorcerer. And keeping that generic connotation, that generic sense of a magic user, negative connotation, because of course magic still, up until very recently, has had a negative connotation, and even today to some extent, depending on the context, can have a negative connotation. So a sorcerer comes into English as a term to refer to someone who just does magic, whether it's related to lot casting or not. Someone who does magic and is therefore a little bit evil because they're dealing with demons. In modern French, the terms sorcier and sorcière still exist, and sorcière is used as what we would in English refer to as a witch. So if you dressed up as a witch for Halloween, tu t'es déguisé en sorcière. And because witches these days are stereotypically considered women, it's mostly sorcière, whereas sorcier still has more of the same connotation as sorcerer in English, as just a sort of generic magic user. Though in the French version of Harry Potter, which I watched on VHS as a kid, they translate witches and wizards as sorcière and sorcier, respectively. Even in English, the term witch didn't always have such a connection necessarily towards a female practitioner. It used to be be less gender determined, but that's a topic for another day. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something, you found it interesting. As always, I thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time.